I think it's come to the point where Giannis has to be on the move. I think we've been on this perpetual drain of, is he staying, is he going? Giannis himself has kind of breadcrumbed in some way, shape, or form that he wants to stay, but he also wants to leave. And I just don't think there's any future in this relationship. Not because the parties necessarily don't want to make it work. It's just not feasible. It's just not probable. I think that Giannis at this stage in his career, and rightfully so, wants to go someplace where he can win. I don't think Milwaukee is any more a place that he can do that. And this is not a knock to Milwaukee. They have tried in multiple.
24.
That's his comp right now.
I'm actually being so.
But how about like at your peak?
Probably about 28, 29. Probably.
Okay, period. That's a lot.
36, dog.
All right, the Warriors won the 11th pick in the NBA draft lottery on Sunday, which would be the highest pick in the draft since taking Jonathan Kuminga at 7th overall in 2021. Keep that in your notebook. Right now on ESPN.com, a must-read for NBA fans. Ray Thompson spent 11 months with Warriors head coach Steve Kerr, following alongside his season and decision to remain with the Warriors. So now we welcome in the 4-time New York Times bestseller, Ray Thompson. Thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, you're welcome, MJ. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
So, right, it was well known that Steve Kerr's contract was up, and the decision on whether he would retire lingered for months. So what was the moment that changed his mind?
I mean, obviously the moment at the play-in game was very visible, but I also think that, there were a lot of factors at work here. I mean, there was loyalty. I think he just didn't feel right leaving if Steph was still there. I think, family things. Nick is on his staff, his son, and his wife certainly likes having the grandkids in town. But I think most of all, I don't think he really has a sense of himself without this job, and I guess more to the point, without a season. Yeah. Like, I'm not sure he really could picture what his life would be like without the 82.
Well, that's understandable because Steve Kerr has spent over half of his life in the NBA as a coach and as a player, winning 9 total titles. But there were several instances where he thought this season was his last. So what did he reflect on to really decide to keep going?
Well, I certainly didn't realize this until I started reading about him and talking to him. But, the person we think of as Steve Kerr really came into the world on January 20th, 1984, when it was 2 days after his father had been assassinated. His father, it's well known, was the president of the American University at Beirut. Steve was a basically unrecruited bench warmer, averaging less than 6 points a game. Lute Olson admitted later that he was planning to recruit somebody else for Steve's spot, and they put him in that game sort of midway through the first half, and he just went off, and he started making all these shots. And it was his career high to that point. And, the basketball team became.
I think it's come to the point where Giannis has to be on the move. I think we've been on this perpetual drain of, is he staying, is he going? Giannis himself has kind of breadcrumbed in some way, shape, or form that he wants to stay, but he also wants to leave. And I just don't think there's any future in this relationship. Not because the parties necessarily don't want to make it work. It's just not feasible. It's just not probable. I think that Giannis at this stage in his career, and rightfully so, wants to go someplace where he can win. I don't think Milwaukee is any more a place that he can do that. And this is not a knock to Milwaukee. They have tried in multiple ways, shapes, and forms to make the situation enticing for Giannis, so he wants to stay. But you can only do so much. They're putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound, and it's just not enough. So the question is, where does Giannis go? Now, he's made it very clear that he wants to remain on the East Coast because it's closer to Greece. And I guess that allows him to travel easily to Greece and also allows probably family to come and see him easier than if he's on the West Coast. There have been rumors that New York's on his list. That's probably not an option given how well my New York Knicks are performing in the postseason. Boston and Jaylen Brown, that has been circulated out there. I think for me, if you're talking East Coast, the only team that makes sense is the Miami Heat. Now, there's gifts and a curse with that. Obviously, defensively, that front court of him and Bam Adebayo, phenomenal. The Heat culture, Giannis fits into that perfectly. The issue where it gets a little sticky for me when we talk about the Giannis situation is they would have to give up multiple players, a draft pick, and maybe some future capital. They might get away with that. You're essentially leaving yourself with like a skeleton crew of a team. So yes, Giannis comes in, but how much of a contender can that team actually be with no supporting cast, with how much Milwaukee's going to want for Giannis? That's the situation that they are in. That's the situation a lot of teams are in. And I just don't know how many teams are really prepared to make that haul. But if you ask me who has the most assets of all the teams out there in the world, or in the league rather, it's probably Miami.
Yeah, well, that depends how the Bucks view Khalil Ware. He's really the only centerpiece guy that because they're not going to trade Bam.
They're going to have Tyler Hero.
Yeah, but I mean, that's, again, if they view Tyler Hero as a centerpiece for a Giannis trade, that would be surprising. So
No, well, they're going to want Tyler Hero. Milwaukee.
Okay, but as a centerpiece of the trade, like,
yeah.
okay, I'm going to make this trade because either you're giving me very valuable draft assets or a young player that I really value. So how much do they value Khalil Ware would be the question in Miami. I think the Knicks are interesting because their assets have actually gained a lot of value in these playoffs. I think Mikal Bridges has shot back up as a guy that would be more covetable than he was even a few months ago. Karl-Anthony Towns is having a fantastic season. That has long been the guy that, from a money standpoint, would kind of have to make a deal work with the Knicks. So let's say they've looked great. They have, and they got through the Hawks and the 76ers. Let's say they get to the Eastern Conference Finals and flame out. There's going to be a lot of talk about a Giannis deal. So have to see how that plays out. Same
if they
thing.
don't,
I mean, if they get to the finals, I wouldn't think. Unless they get embarrassed there. I wouldn't rule out the Knicks. That's been, I mean, where there's smoke, there's fire. That's been the team that everybody, that's where he wants to go.
Giannis has said
they
that he
have
wants
the
to go
assets.
there. Yeah.
I think we have to see how this plays out for the Knicks. And then Cleveland is the other team because Evan Mobley is a guy that I think could be a centerpiece, and it's a guy that I think Cleveland is going to look to move off of, and especially if they flame out here in the second round against Detroit. There's going to be a lot of upheaval on that roster. So, and then the other team is she mentioned it with Boston and Jaylen Brown. So all these Eastern Conference teams, it's going to come down to which centerpiece asset the Bucks feel like they value more. Do they want to go the draft pick route and restart, or do they want a Karl-Anthony Towns and Evan Mobley or Jaylen Brown where they stay viable in the short term?
It sounds like you're leaning more towards finding that piece for the Bucks.
It has to be. You're trading Giannis Antetokounmpo.
Right. Yeah.
You have to.
I'm actually surprised you said Cleveland because that means you're coming off of Donovan Mitchell.
No,
because how are you going to pay Donovan, James Harden, and Giannis?
Well, James Harden's not going to get anywhere near max money. So you can have two max players, and James Harden will decline the player option and get a lower annual value. They'll make the money work. It's a question of, has Evan Mobley's value dropped? Is he considered? These big swing deals are all about centerpiece assets. Yeah. If you trade Giannis, or the only team that didn't do it was the Mavericks traded Luka. But if you trade one of these guys, you have to get a centerpiece, whether that's a super valuable draft pick or collection of draft picks, or a super young player. It has to be one of the two.
Yeah, and Anthony Davis, the center of that trade, is someone we'll talk about in a bit.
That's not it.
That's not it. No, he has a whole separate issue. How about Kawhi, though? He's an interesting guy because it was somebody that we were talking about around the trade deadline. The Warriors seemed like they were going all in for him. Is that the team that we look back to here, Brad?
Yeah.
Warriors Nation News. Dub Nation, let me ask you the question that would make the entire Western Conference sit up straight right now. What happens if the Warriors stop playing around, stop thinking small, and actually make the biggest swing of the Steph Curry era by going after Giannis Antetokounmpo? Because the second you picture Steph and Giannis on the same court, the whole thing changes. The spacing changes, the fear changes, the entire identity of Golden State changes. And no, let's be clear from the jump, this is not a confirmed deal. It is not official. But this is not fake fantasy either. The Bucks are once again open to exploring trade offers for Giannis ahead of the draft, and ESPN's recent contender breakdown has the Warriors on the board among the teams that make sense in a serious Giannis conversation. Now, from the Warriors side, the urgency is obvious. Golden State just finished 37-45, missed the playoffs after the play-in, and still made one thing crystal clear by bringing Steve Kerr back on a new multi-year deal. This franchise is not quitting on Steph Curry. They are still trying to win. They are still trying to squeeze one more real championship push out of this era. That matters because when a franchise chooses continuity with Kerr after a disappointing season, it is also choosing pressure. Pressure to improve, pressure to get bigger, pressure to stop wasting time. And that is exactly why Giannis makes so much sense. Steph is still the greatest off-ball weapon in basketball. Giannis is still one of the most devastating downhill forces the league has ever seen. So what do defenses do with that? Trap Steph high? Giannis attacks a broken floor. Build a wall for Giannis? Steph relocates and turns one mistake into 3 points. Keep both covered? Then Draymond Green is in the middle of the floor making reads while the entire defense is already in panic mode. That is not a normal offense. That is stress. That is playoff stress. That is the kind of pressure that can break even elite teams. And think about the West. Oklahoma City has youth, depth, and pressure. Denver still has Jokic. Minnesota brings size and defense. Dallas always has star creation. Phoenix can still scare people with top-end talent. So what would Giannis do in this conference if he landed in Golden State? He would make the Warriors less fragile, less dependent on perfect shot-making, and way more violent in the paint. He would give them rim pressure, transition dominance, weak side defense, rebounding, and another true superstar who can carry entire stretches of a game. That is what makes this different from every smaller rumor. Giannis is not just help. Giannis is the kind of move that changes the balance of power. Now, let's be honest about the hard part. A Giannis trade would be brutal to pull off. ESPN's trade contender reporting makes clear he still has major value, with 2 years left on his contract if you include the player option, and he is still extension eligible for monster money. So Golden State would not be getting him cheaply. They would have to pay in picks, salary, and pain. Real pain. But Dub Nation, come on now. Stars like this do not hit the market often, and the Warriors are not in a position where safe little moves are enough. Safe moves do not scare the West. Safe moves do not maximize Steph's last elite years. Safe moves do not justify bringing Kerr back and acting like the window is still alive. So here's my final take, loud and clear, favorable to the Warriors. If Giannis truly becomes available and Golden State has a path, they should be all the way in. No hesitation, no half step, no pretending this is just another rumor cycle. Because Giannis next to Steph would not just make the Warriors better, it would make them terrifying again. Dub Nation, I need your answer right now. If the Warriors had a real shot at Giannis Antetokounmpo, would you trade almost anything to bring him to the Bay? Drop your opinion in the comments, hit like, and subscribe to Warriors Nation News.